Hello operators, Oscar Hotel 8, Sierra Tango November here from Survival Tech North. For the past few weeks, many of us have sheltered in place or been in some sort of quarantine to protect ourselves and our loved ones from this ongoing pandemic. Now, if you're one of the many people who watch this channel, you're probably more prepared than most for a scenario like this. Now, even though this current crisis isn't a grid-down scenario or the end of the world as we know it, our ability to maintain our personal emergency communications is no less important. So today's topic is effective group communications. It may be a little abstract, but if you give me a while, I'll tell you all about it.
You are listening to the Emergency Broadcast Systems. This station broadcasts emergency news and official information on the air for assigned narrative.
Although traditionally we consider voice communications the most popular and often the easiest to use, there are other modes of communications which are valid for such a scenario. I like to refer to these comms as passive communications. Passive communications can be full-on data or a combination of data and voice. Some examples of passive communications are APRS, JS8Call, ALE or SELCAL, and email with WinLink or PSK mail. Passive communications are most effective during situations where we as radio operators can't actively sit in front of the radio. This is no different than when we're operating off-grid and in the field, where we need to take care about the station and living chores. To put it in a nutshell, the idea of being a dedicated radio operator doing a scenario like this is neither realistic or practical. This concept is driven entirely by the need to maintain and take care of our homes, ourselves, and our loved ones without focusing entirely on radio communications. So we need to come up with ways to use our radio communications without our radio communications becoming a distraction. So what you're looking at now is JS8Call. I'm using it to send a message to my buddy Arne in Sweden. Now I already know his station is on air because it acknowledged one of my station's heartbeats just a short time ago. So I'll type out this message, send it off, and wait for an acknowledgement from his station. Receiving an acknowledgement doesn't necessarily mean that Arne has read the message, only that his station has received it and it's waiting for him. Now, if Arne was a part of my group, we would undoubtedly have a cohesive communications plan. This is how I'd know at some point he'd be checking his messages. But for now anyway, that acknowledgement is more than good enough. When our goal is communicating with a larger group of people, we can also do that as well. By now, some of you may have noticed the strange call signs in JS8Call. These are actually group call signs. Group call signs allow us to send messages or chat with a larger group of stations while using a single call sign. When we send out a group message, everyone who has signed up for that group call sign will receive the message. This is true because JS8Call decodes the entire bandpass. So as long as your station and receiving stations are in that bandpass, you'll receive that message. So now we're going to send out another message to the NRD net. Only this time I'll also show you what the receiving stations are seeing on their screens as we send the message. While we're sending that message out, I'll tell you about another feature JS8Call has. So JS8Call has 4 speed modes: slow, normal is what you're looking at now, then there's fast, and finally there's turbo. Slow and normal modes take advantage of the networking functionalities of JS8Call, while fast and turbo are meant for real-time or near real-time QSOs and chat. It actually doesn't matter what speed mode you happen to be on during a QSO, since you can turn on simultaneous decode in JS8Call to decode all speeds at the same time. Anyway, getting back to the point, now we can see how we sent the message and we can see what the message looks like as it appears on the receiving stations. So now let's look at setting up our own persistent group net on JS8Call and sending out a test message to that net when we're done. So we're going to open up the configuration menu and stay on the General tab. On the General tab, there's a box called Call Sign Group. We're going to enter a new group there called CV19. CV19 is the name of that pesky little virus terrorizing the world at the moment. So go ahead and enter CV19 and click OK. You can now find that call sign group on your list. And now we're going to send out a text message. It's going to be a little different than the previous messages we've sent because it's actually going to be a message with a pop-up to the receiving stations. To send a message to a particular net, go ahead and double-click that net and then move down to the composition box to start typing your message. When you're done composing that message, go ahead and hit Enter or click Send to fire it off. While we wait for that message to send, let's talk about heartbeats, networking, and timeouts. So in the Configurations tab, we can find a couple of more useful features for group communications. When we use JS8Call in its networking mode, we're sending out a heartbeat every X minutes. Using the Configuration tab, we can set up JS8Call to stop sending out a heartbeat after a certain amount of time. We can also set up JS8Call to reply only to our group net. It also raises the alarm that the operator hasn't actually been to the station in a certain amount of time, which could be a red flag. Using the Only Reply to These Stations features allows you to set up your station to focus purely on your group net. So we've sent our message off and the receiving station is now going to receive a pop-up telling them about the message. We're also going to send an ACK to the transmitting station letting them know that we received the message successfully. This is all possible without any interaction from the receiving station's operator. But it's also possible to turn these features off if you don't want to use them. Now we can see that acknowledgement arriving at the initiating station, the transmit station. Now before we move on, I noticed that little flag next to Arne's call sign. That means that he sent us a response to our message. Let's take a look at that. Well, absolutely outstanding. Arne says he's okay, and he sends well wishes to us as well. We should send a huge thanks on 73 to Arne, who is usually an unwitting participant in my videos. Thank you, Arne. So as you see in the video, I created the CV19 group net on JS8Call. I think we can keep this net up and running for the duration of this crisis. The JS8Call community can use this group net to share or receive information about the COVID-19 virus over the air without any dependence on grid-tied communications. What you're seeing now is a message being received from the CV19 group net. It's a message about Helsinki officials believing it may be necessary to lock down that metropolitan area to prevent further spreading of the virus throughout Finland. Now, sending this message out doesn't actually create any QRM for any of the other stations using JS8Call on the band. It's only a 50 Hz signal being sent out. Now, although this is a test message, all 5 stations in my group will receive this message because they're already in the CV19 group net. Now we can use the system to send out generic messages like this, updates or news in quotes, about what's happening with the outbreak and the crisis. But we can also use the system to update our group members about changes in our operational behavior. Let me just point something out about these group messages. First, you see at the beginning of the group message there's a call sign, there's a semicolon, and then there's an address or another call sign. So the first call sign we see at the beginning of the message is the call sign of the station who sent it to the net. The second call sign is the group net's call sign, or we can also call it the address. So now I'm going to compose a response to that update and send it to the group. Now I could just respond to the station which sent out that update, but of course there'd be no point to group communications if I did that. Instead, I'm going to reply back to the group net so all the stations know what I'm planning to do. Now, while we'll send that out, I'll answer a question that I get quite regularly on the channel. Can we use JS8Call with CB radio? The answer is absolutely yes, and here is why we might want to. Not everyone has an amateur radio license, and not every situation warrants emergency communications. So, it's totally possible to set up JS8Call on CB radio with lower or upper sideband. Now, it may come as some surprise, but there is an enormous amount of people out there who don't necessarily want to invest or can't invest the time and energy or effort right now in obtaining their amateur radio license, but I think we should support them anyway. So I think as long as you're not breaking any local rules or regulations about data communications and CB radio, I would suggest just giving it a try. I'm sure the unlicensed operators who you know would very much appreciate it. Okay, so that message was sent, and now we see my doppelganger is sending me an RR to let me know that message was understood and received. Now I'm going to show you the reception of one more message. However, this time it's going to be in turbo mode. So once again, I'm getting an update from my doppelganger, who's telling me his updated plans during this crisis. He and his family will be heading north to Utsjoki, where they have a cabin near the Norwegian border. He also says he's going to send position reports using JS8Call during the trip. So before we move on to the next part of the video, I think I'll show you exactly how that works and what else we can do with those tools. One of the issues we have in group communications is actually managing where our group members actually are. Now I can imagine, without there being a grid down scenario, without there being some sort of massive disaster, most people wouldn't see any need for this functionality. Now it doesn't matter if we're talking about emergency communications for preparedness or emergency communications for public service. Managing our people and understanding where they are is an important part of that. So we're going to use a tool created by Mike 0 India Alpha X-Ray, which utilizes the JS8Call API to send APRS position reports using JS8Call like HF APRS. So we're going to push that button, transmit grid, and transition over to JS8Call to watch it happen. JS8Call utilities can handle the grid in two different ways. You can use it, assuming you have a GPS, you can use it to update the grid square in JS8Call, or you can tell it to send your current grid square to JS8Call after a certain amount of time. Then when JS8Call sends out its normal heartbeat, the heartbeat which you set the time interval for, your current grid square will also be sent out along with it. This means not only JS8Call users have access to your position, but also people who are not amateur radio operators who are looking outside your area from the internet. So now we can see from APRS.phi that Sierra Mike 6 Foxtrot Mike Bravo was actually the one who heard my signal. Now Mark has done an incredible job with this utility, but it's not the only thing it does. So let's say there are people, a part of our group, who we want to reach out to. Perhaps they have internet access or they're outside the area. We can also use JS8Call utilities to send out an email using APRS via JS8Call. So the bottom half of the form on JS8Call utilities is for APRS messaging. We select the type of message, which is default, it's an email. We select the mode, and that's normal. And then we enter an email address, followed up by our message. Now, although the message is very short, you can still use this email functionality to let people know you're okay, let people know you're alive, let people know where you're going. Then we fire off that message to people who may not actually have radio communications capabilities. So once again, my doppelganger is telling me that, hey, we're heading up north to Utsuoki. I'll meet you there. So once we push that button, transmit with JS8Call, the message will be pre-formatted and pasted into the JS8Call composition window. And it'll then start transmitting. So if you already have stations in your station lists, you know that there are stations which can hear you, chances are this message is going to be heard by one of those stations and forwarded on to APRS. Now I can't tell you how important it is being able to send short messages to people who are not amateur radio operators, who are not on the radio, but they do someplace in the world have internet access. This ability to get messages out of the region to people who aren't necessarily ham radio operators is epic. Now, although it's extremely useful, this functionality for email via APRS only works in one direction. I look at it like this: it's better to be able to reach out and send that message than not having any way to reach those people at all. You might find this actually quite astonishing if the message makes it out, but I'm actually transmitting with 1 watt. This APRS email is being transmitted with just 1 watt out. So let's see how well this actually works. I'm a bit skeptical. So the message did arrive on my Samsung Galaxy S8, my mobile phone. Now, although this was a test message, it could have been sent as a real message to anyone in the world or any group of people in the world. So I'm actually pretty stoked about this JS8Call utilities. I'll leave a link to Mark's website in the description. Now we're going to take a moment to talk about the realities of group communications. Quite often with group communications, there's an assumption about where we actually are or where we are in relation to one another. It really could be foolish for us to believe all of our group members have the same comms capabilities and that they're located in the same local area or region. So here's a map of my situation, my local area. My group could definitely communicate with VHF simplex, which would solve lots of problems. Unfortunately, we don't all have high enough VHF antennas for line-of-sight communications. There are VHF and UHF repeaters in the area which can fill the gap. But since those are shared resources, we don't want to hog the repeater for everyday communications. Now, my group's preferred method of communications is using NVIS, Near Vertical Incidence Skywave. My group prefers NVIS communications for its primary comms. Firstly, because it has modest antenna requirements. Secondly, it can be used with a magnetic loop for our apartment-dwelling group members. And finally, because it has a much wider coverage area than VHF without any infrastructure requirements. This larger coverage area allows us to reach out to extended family and friends and include them in our group communication strategy. As we begin to understand all the variables of group communications, it becomes clear we can't rely on a sole handy-talky strategy for group communications. So I'd like to spend the next few minutes showing you how my station is currently set up for group communications during this pandemic. My primary radio for VHF communications is the Kenwood TMD700. It's the old faithful. So the D700 has a couple of different jobs to do. It needs to run APRS 24/7 over RF. So naturally it's sending out position reports and sending and receiving messages. For local communications or communications through the repeater, I'm using an X something, I don't remember the number, from Diamond, and that's mounted up on the tower. There's also 2 Yagis up on the tower for 2 meters and 70 centimeters, which also run to the D700. Now, the D700 is usually used at home in the shack, but it can be deployed portable with any one of the battery packs we've built on the channel. And next we have the Yaesu FT891. This is my primary HF radio for emergency communications. So as most of you know already, I'm using the Yaesu FT891 for data modes like JS8Call, but I'm also using it for voice communications via ALE and voice and text communications with SELCAL. The app running on the tablet there is called HamRing, and it allows ALE and SELCAL through the FT891. At the moment, I'm using two different antennas with the Yaesu FT891 for group and emergency communications. I'm sure you can't see them on the tower, but the first one is the Chameleon MCOM3 base. I'm using the MCOM3 base for regional communications, communications in EMEA, and for DX communications. The other antenna I'm using for local and regional communications is the Chameleon MCOM3 portable. It's not visible in this picture, but it runs about 5 meters or 16 feet horizontally across the yard from the tower. And next we have a radio which isn't a part of my normal emergency communications setup. That's the Xiegu G90. At the moment I'm using it along with the Raspberry Pi and the ZLP Mini Pro SC to run data modes like JS8Call. I'm using the Xiegu G90 with a random wire in-fed antenna in NVIS configuration, 40 meters during the day, 80 meters at night. This next radio is very special, of course they all are, but this one has a very special job. This radio was gifted to me by a longtime subscriber last Christmas. It's the Vertex Standard VX1210 Man Pack. Just to quickly give you an idea about what this radio means to me, if someone said you can choose one of your radios, Julian, for SHTF and your life depends on it, the VX1210 is the radio out of all of my radios I would choose. Now, one of the things I love about this radio is the embedded SELCAL, but that's only part of its job. The other thing I'm using it for, along with a Mini Pro SC audio interface, is for WinLink. As you all know, like we saw in Puerto Rico and other disasters around the world, if you want to get a message out of the disaster zone to a person who is not an amateur radio operator, you need to use email. At the moment, this radio loads up a Super Antenna MP1. It's sitting right here next to the desk. It does a great job of reaching out to a station in Norway, just a bit northwest from me, to collect my email. And collecting my email is something I obviously need to do more often. Now, this radio has been around the world a few times already, but I look forward to making some new memories with this radio with all of you on the channel. Now this brings us to how I power everything in the shack. Now, I've posted a couple of teasers about the BuddyPole Power Plus, and now I'm going to show you one way I'm using it in the shack. So I'm sure most of you remember the 45 amp hour solar generator we built on the channel last year. Well, that's feeding the BuddyPole Power Plus. All of the radios, the Raspberry Pis, the laptops, everything, even the VX1210, is all fed by this BuddyPole Power Plus. I've got a single 8-gauge cable coming out of the solar generator and into the Power Plus. That cable has 45 amp power pole connectors. Now, I still have the two 80-watt panels on the tower, which are feeding the solar generator. This time of year, they can keep up with the load on a sunny day, but it's not easy. So I'm actually forced to run ridiculously low power. But this isn't really a bad thing, and it's something we should all aspire to do. Use the power that you need to make the contact, not more. Anyway, we're going to do a full review on the BuddyPole Power Plus on the channel in the coming weeks, so please look out for that. So continuing on with power for a moment, you see the 45 amp hour solar generator there. You see the large wire coming out of that and heading into the BuddyPole Power Plus. You see all the wires feeding all of the different radio equipment and Raspberry Pis. Now coming in on the right side of the screen, you see two of my battery packs. These are my backup battery packs, one for portable ops, the other to power the station in an emergency. You may recognize some of the components in this pack. This is the A123 5 amp hour lithium iron phosphate pack we built on the channel some time ago. What's different now is we've coupled it with the BuddyPole Power Mini. Now, some of you have already been asking me if this is a replacement for the Guinness-on controllers, and I can say absolutely not. I'm interested in the Power Mini because it's a programmable charge controller with power pole and USB outputs. We're also going to get to a BuddyPole Power Mini review in the coming weeks. The larger pack in the black Samsonite camera bag is a 20 amp hour headway lithium iron phosphate pack. It's the little sister to the 45 amp hour solar generator we built on the channel last year. It's got all the same components as the pack for the 45 amp hour solar generator. The only difference being the GV boost controller from Guinness-on for lithium iron phosphate packs. Now, I can't stress this enough, guys. Even though this isn't a grid-down scenario we're all living through right now, we should always train as if it is. I always get that question about what should someone buy, but I always tell them you should build your station in the way that you're going to use it. So there's one more segment to this video and then we're going to shut it down. Of course, in this pandemic, the goal is never to leave our shelter, but if I needed to head someplace quickly, or I know that I needed to go someplace on the fat bike, in the car, on the motorcycle, this is the pack that I always have with me. Now, this kit is based on the Yaesu FT817ND, a Raspberry Pi, and the QRP VER 10-watt amplifier. It also has a very lightweight and portable power system that goes along with this kit. So the portable power system is the PowerFilm Lightsaver Max. Now, I think the Yaesu FT817ND and the Yaesu FT818 are perfect for this role. And I'm kind of happy I didn't sell this radio, but still, I'm looking forward to the ICOM 705 when it arrives. So that's it, guys. That's my entire station as set up for this pandemic and group communications. So I would really love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know what you think about this video and tell me about your own emergency communications or group communication strategy. Remember, there really are no right or wrong answers. We each have a different perspective and different goals for emergency communications. Feel free to share some feedback about this video or about your own station or strategy. If you're supporting this channel through Patreon, PayPal, or simply sharing my content, you're absolutely magnificent and I couldn't do it without you. For the rest of you, if you like what I'm doing, if you like the content I'm creating, leave me a comment and a thumbs up to let me know. And if it's not too much to ask, please share this video with someone or someplace where other operators might enjoy it. Rock and roll, guys. Thanks for watching. Ciao.